I mean, it's hard to describe how things have gone. I mean, this is not what anybody imagined. It's frankly hard to explain. It's a little bit of a perfect storm of a lot of inexperience in young players combined with a lot of veteran players not sort of playing to their expected level, throw in a bunch of injuries, and you sort of get where we are right now. So I don't think anyone's having a ton of fun, frankly. We're all trying to take away the positives that we can from, individual nights or individual at-bats or innings. I mean, I think Mark's done an incredible job of staying positive and trying to motivate these guys through a situation that I don't know that anybody else has been through. I mean, obviously there are a lot of numbers out there about how we've performed to date, but it's hard to think of an analogous situation with any other team right now. So, there are positives. There are guys' individual performances that have been encouraging. Ruiz has done a great job. Noda's doing what we expected. Rooker took advantage of his opportunity. I think JP has pitched really well consistently. There are positives in the bullpen too. We've seen guys like Lovelady and Urseg and Acton and Mole, on various nights pitch really well. So obviously we need to put it together at some point in order to get some wins, but right now it's tough every day for these guys.
There was a lot of sort of reliance coming in on younger pitching, especially in the starting rotation. Can you just sort of kind of evaluate what you've seen from some of the young starters?
Sure. I mean, young pitching is dangerous to count on. That's sort of the bottom line. I mean, we've seen it here before. I mean, the last group of starters that was here, if you look at a Bassett or a Montas or some of those guys, they all, had their ups and downs, but what we had at the time was experience around them to sort of stabilize it. And you didn't have 5 nights where, you had a chance to be in the bullpen very early. And that's what you get with young pitchers. So it's hard to do that all at once. Obviously, when we signed Fuji and we signed Drew, we thought that their experience elsewhere would translate here. It hasn't. I mean, Drew hasn't been healthy, so that's not fair to him. Fuji's actually leveled off really nicely in the bullpen and given us some things to be encouraged about. But young pitching is going to have its ups and downs. And you'll see, I mean, I mentioned JP, but Ken has had outings where he's looked like what we saw last September, and then he's had outings like the other night where he struggled to get through his 3rd inning. Kyle was very inconsistent, frankly, after opening night. I think we were really encouraged after opening night, and then he just couldn't get that consistency back, and we're hopeful that a little breather and some time in AAA gets him focused on some mechanics and some of his repertoire. But it's hard to count on young pitching every night, and we've sort of seen the results of that.
Martinez had a pretty good outing out of the bullpen yesterday. Just with him going down to AAA, is the plan to put him back in a starting role, or do you see him still working out of the bullpen down there? He's
going to start in AAA. And I think, Adrian was sort of thrown into that length role in the bullpen as of opening day because of because of Drew's injuries, because of Blackburn's injury, and he did a nice job. But we do long-term still want to give him a chance to start, so he'll be stretched out when he goes down there.
I remember off-season kind of just randomly asked you about Rooker and just claiming him, and you guys are pretty excited about the potential there. But to see what he's kind of developed into so far this year, I guess how has that been, just seeing what you guys felt he had kind of play out on the field as it has so far?
Yeah, it's I'm excited for him that he took advantage of the opportunity. I mean, I don't know if he's said this, but I mean, we didn't let him know he made the team until like the last night after that last Giants game. And he told Mark and I at the time that he'd been in 3 or 4 of those meetings on the last night before and it had never gone his way. And he was pretty appreciative that night that it did. And then to go out and take advantage of the opportunity, that's exactly what you hope for when you claim a guy on waivers and there's talent there and maybe just the right spot. So it was very rewarding to see him do what he did in April. Now, obviously, anytime you do that, the league adjusts and you have to adjust back. And we saw him hit some balls hard last night and not have anything to show for it. But, I think we all knew he was, he's a major league hitter. So it's nice to see what he's done.
Yes, David, you just mentioned some names there, that outstanding young people that you have in this team. Obviously, the other teams are also looking at those guys and seeing how those guys might help them to compete. Is it a situation where you could be a big seller in the middle of the season, looking for more prospects for the future, for those guys that are now excelling with the A's?
Manolo, we haven't even gotten that far in our conversations and our thoughts. We're so sort of focused right now on day to day, trying to win games. It's hard to win games in this league. So I have not gotten to the point where we're thinking about what comes at the deadline. There are a lot of players in AA and AAA that we're excited about and who are performing, and we're talking about them every day and when they arrive, what their role is. But my focus has not been on, trades or bringing more players in from the outside, to be honest.
Yes, you mentioned the players, young players. You have a whole bunch of young players there too.
Mm-hmm.
Should we expect to see people like Galoff and Tyler coming up sometime this season?
I think you should expect to see them when they're ready. I don't want to get into a situation where we're rushing guys' development because of what's happening here. I mean, we talked about this a little bit when Mason came up, and the player has to tell you he's ready. Now, obviously, there are situations with injuries and other things that happen here where we have no choice, but, the ideal is to bring those guys up when they've performed to the point where they are clearly ready to come here and stay. Jordan's a player who's been up and down and done some really nice things while he's been here. It's going to take the right time for there to be everyday at-bats for him when we really want him to be here. He's going to go down, he's going to play some third base, make sure he's more versatile, but he's proven, at times that he can perform here. So with a young player, you have to make sure the environment is ready for them here and that they've performed to the level in AAA.
Yes, you have something totally different from the other 29 colleagues of yours.
I do.
Totally different. They don't have to deal with all of this situation of moving to Las Vegas or not. How do you deal as a general manager with this alternate situation so different from other years?
It's not something that affects our day-to-day. These guys are focused, and I know Mark has said this, these guys are focused on what happens on the field, and so are we as a baseball operations group. Dave has been working for years and years and years on that, and he continues to work on it, but it's not something that we focus on day to day. So, I work with Mark, he works with the coaches, they work with the players on focusing on what we can control, what happens on the field. That stuff is obviously ongoing. We all see it, we all hear it, and there are times when I worry about the players having to deal with the distraction. They don't need that. They have enough to focus on, and they have to worry about they're getting their stuff done on the field. But for the rest of us, it's easy to focus on the team and the field and not that stuff.
You mentioned being encouraged, and I feel like you said, Katse's really done a good job finding those bright spots. Mm-hmm. Has some of that diminished a little bit and he said we're not fake when we're looking at some of those positive spots, but What was the timeline when you got kind of real saying we can't say these are positives, there's some things we need to work on? God,
I hope, Jess, we don't get to that point. It's harder. I'm happy to say that. It is harder when you're 10 and whatever we are, to come into Mark's office after the game every night and be like, hey, let's talk about the positives, because the losing wears on you. And I know it does on, the guys in the office, the guys in the clubhouse. But I hope we don't get to the point where we can't be positive about something, because you have to be able to see sort of the light at the end right now. Otherwise, why is everybody putting in so much work?
David, you mentioned at the start that how disappointed you are, and we're not disappointed, but just how the veterans have kind of underperformed here so far this season. Are you seeing, is there any common thread to what you're seeing from those guys? And, is it disappointing too, given that the constraints of your budget, that you spend money that you have on guys who just aren't getting the job done right now, I guess? So
I didn't use the word disappointed. I think I would be disappointed if I didn't feel like guys were working their butts off, and that is absolutely not the case. I mean, obviously, it affects the outcomes when anyone doesn't perform up to what we expected. But I have no doubt that those guys are working. If there was a common thread, some of these guys are being asked to carry more of the load than they did previously in their careers, and that's not their fault. I mean, that's the roster that we put together. When you have young players, any veteran guy is going to be asked to take on a role that maybe he hasn't played on another team, where he either wasn't an everyday guy or wasn't expected to lead, things like that. So if they're asked to do things they haven't done before, that's on us. That, we put them in that position, so that's not fair to hold them accountable for. I mean, all that said, again, these guys put in the work. They have track records. I get that we're 2 months in, but I still think it's realistic to expect them to perform better. I think we need them to. And if you put that together with some young players continuing to trend positively, I mean, I think we see some wins in our future. I think we have to feel that way.
You mentioned, obviously, you like the way Mark has tried to stay positive with this group. What's your evaluation of the rest of the staff, the rest of the coaching staff, and the job they've done here?
Again, those guys get judged on how much work they put in, how much communication they have with the players, and neither Mark nor I can find fault in any of those guys right now. They are here before the rest of us get to the ballpark. They stay late. They care. They're putting in the time, and it's always, as long as I've been here, we've always said it's hard. It's hard to hold those guys accountable for what happens between the lines. They can only do so much. The players have to go out and perform.
So you don't anticipate making any changes? Those guys will be here for the rest of the
Absolutely
year?
not been discussed.
With the way the season has gone so far, do you reassess long-term, like what the next window of contention could be?
We don't really have a long term. I mean, that's sort of the blunt answer is we've always worked year to year. We've always, third of the season to third of the season, like no more so than right now. I think we're trying to get better over the next 2 months than we were over the first 2 months. So I don't mean to dodge your question, but we don't have a long term right now.
Do you reassess at all how, I guess, at-bats, playing time is being allocated right now? I know you said you don't want to rush young players up
Yeah.
if they feel like they're not ready, but do you look at just kind of the balance between youth and veteran players? Yeah,
it's a balance every day. It's a conversation every day. So I think, performance still drives a lot of Mark's decisions when it comes to the lineup. And we're not necessarily here to develop guys in the big leagues. We're put in that position more frequently than we'd like to be, but it's not the way we would choose to do it. But yeah, there's a balance. There's definitely a balance right now. But I think if you ask Mark, he'd say, I want to put the guys in there who are performing, who give us the best chance to win on any given night.
Not necessarily just the uncertainty about where the team's going to be, but the atmosphere around it right now, just with a lot of the discourse being about the stadium and you see what's going on in the stands and everything. Do you feel like that's having an effect on the on-field play? I
think you'd have to ask those guys. I mean, again, from where I sit, I feel bad that they have to deal with the distraction. They didn't do anything to sort of affect the atmosphere here. All they've done is work hard and go out there and try and win. I assume it affects them. I mean, you can't sit in the stadium and not hear it or see it, but you'd have to ask them to what extent.
I guess, how would you evaluate your own and the front office's sort of performance in putting together this roster so far? And
it's a nice way to say it. I appreciate that. I mean, I just said we're 10 and 43, 44. What is it? 43. We're 10 and 43. We have a lot of work to do.
I know you're focused on the here and now in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
But do you feel, David, that looking at the minor leagues and the players who are there like Geloff and Soderstrom and Double A Harris and that group with Butler, that you'll be able to identify the next group, the core that you can go forward with by the end of this year or early next year? I mean, how do you see that as you project it?
I don't know that we have a timeline as to like when we have to identify that group. I think we have people here who've done a really good job over the past the 20 plus years that I've been here at doing it, whether it's, Eric and the scouting staff, Ed and the player development staff. I think we've got a pretty good track record at identifying. I mean, we did bring Braden up, but that wasn't my mistake. But no, we've got a pretty good track record, I think, at identifying those guys and getting them here. And it's exciting to look at those minor league box scores every night and see who the next group is. And you mentioned a couple of them, but Denzel and Lawrence, and then you go to Lansing and Muncie and Susac, and all the way down to Henry Bolte and Stockton. Like there are talented players here who, whether they came from the draft or from our trades, like there's reason to believe that we're going to develop guys to get here. It just, every night that you walk away with a loss, you feel like it's not quick enough. So I don't know what that timeline is. And again, I started this off by saying we don't want to rush guys here. We don't want them here before they're ready. But that conversation is always ongoing.
Like you were just saying, you don't want to rush guys here, but is it fair to say that more of the guys who were drafted 4, 5, 6 years ago, more of those guys should be ready and up here? Assuming that you obviously you've traded a few here and there.
Yeah.
But should more of the guys who have been drafted in 16, 17, 18, some of those guys be up here?
Wow. I don't know, off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure who we're talking about. Obviously, there are a few years there where the first round pick is not here, and that makes a big difference on how a draft is evaluated, fairly or not. But yeah, we've traded talented guys too for major league players. That's part of the sort of cycle of competing, is to get some of the players who made up those teams in 18, 19, and 20. We traded players out of those drafts. So yeah, I think we've done a good job drafting. I think the last teams that won here were comprised of a lot of guys that came out of our own draft. That's our goal going forward. There's only a couple guys out there right now who came through our draft. And I think if we can create a situation where more of them come from the group in AA and AAA, then that's probably one of the better formulas for success.
David, I know it's difficult to evaluate trades when they're still relatively new, even the ones you made last year, but what's the progress for Ginn, for Cusick, for Hoagland? These are pretty significant arms that you were identifying if you were put in a position to trade the players that you did, that you wanted to get some guys back that maybe could push into the system. And even like seeing Tarnak pitch yesterday, at least on the side, where's the progress for those guys? How hopeful are that those guys can still be arms that can provide for the club?
Yeah, it's a good group that you mentioned, and I would add Salinas and Estes in there as well. I mean, look, I said young major league pitchers are inconsistent. Like even younger pitchers are both inconsistent, and health is an issue with Ginn, with Hoagland. They haven't had really good luck when it comes to health. The guys who are out there, Cusick's got a sub-2 ERA in the Texas League. Salinas is pitching well. Estes has made the jump from A-ball to AA and done really well. All the way down to a guy like Dicochea and Stockton. Like there is a group of pitchers that we feel good about. It's a long way from there to here, obviously, and that means they have to stay healthy. That means they have to continue to develop. Yeah, I would say the answer is we feel good about them, but we know there's a long way to go.
I know health is an issue in any of these situations, but what we've noticed around baseball and other organizations, the desire to either position players or pitchers, that they push them a little quicker than what it used to be. I mean, maybe when you started, it was 500 innings to pitch and 1,500 at-bats or plate appearances. That seems to be gone. So do you feel like if the timing is right, you're not afraid to accelerate some of those guys as well in your own system?
Yeah, I don't think we work by an innings number or a plate appearances number at all. I think, again, I think it's a little bit of a subjective, like, hey, when they're ready. So yeah, you've certainly seen a change over the last, even 10 years, let alone 20, that guys are ready earlier. It's they're younger players in the big leagues, and the talent is what ultimately wins out rather than just sort of reps at this point.